Hello, I'm Ron Stevenson of BarlowKnife.com, a website that is to serve and bring together New Jersey acoustic musicians and traditional musicians nationwide. Today, I am honored to have here Larry Edelman. Welcome, Larry.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ron.
I will try to make the introduction brief, although that itself would be a challenge. Larry is a filmmaker, and that's how he came to my attention, and a multi-instrumentalist, old-time musician from Denver, Colorado. His most recent films are Dance All Night, which is the Highland String Band story, and my favorite, the Canote Twins, which I'm proud that he has made available for us to feature on BarlowKnife.com. And Larry's films are available for free home streaming also at PiggySnoutProductions.com. He's been calling dances and playing music for over 40 years. And he travels widely, and he has played for dances and taught hundreds of workshops and camps throughout the U.S. and even Europe, including the Festival of the American Fiddle Tunes, Ashokan, Augusta, Pinewoods, Lady of the Lake, Rocky Mountain Fiddle Camp, Dare to be Square, and Berkeley Old Time Music Convention, among others. And as a musician, Larry plays old time and southwestern music on the fiddle, mandolin, and guitar. He's performed and recorded with so many bands. I just want to mention here the ones that I like the sound of the best. I especially like Devilish Mary, as we all know that's an old time tune, just like Barlow Knife. I like also the Percolators, the Soda Rock Ramblers, the Fiddle Dogs, and the Prairie Chickens, and especially Poultry in Motion. So those are some really colorful names, Larry. So as a video and film producer, Larry has founded Piggy Snout Productions, and he has produced both short and long feature-length documentaries on numerous topics, to include childhood education, working with families who have children with disabilities, and hundreds of instructional videos for state agencies, university programs, and early childhood educational, disability, and health agencies. And focus films about traditional music and dance, which is my favorite of his works. He was awarded a Fellowship of Folk Arts from Pennsylvania Council of the Arts to study with elder square dancer Jerry Goodwin. And he's also, as I mentioned, his films are available for free streaming. So welcome, Larry.
Well, thank you. I'm exhausted. Yeah, you forgot to mention one thing.
Oh, yes.
I'm originally from New Jersey.
I didn't know that.
I know.
Wow, there's a connection. Where are you from in New Jersey?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia and lived there until I was about 5. And then my family moved to what at the time was called Haddonfield down in southern New Jersey, then became Cherry Hill.
And that's not far from the Pine Barrens. We have Albert Music Hall down there, and it's got its own traditional music as well.
I remember that song. I'm proud to be a South Jersey piney, from my South Jersey head to my South Jersey hiney.
That is wonderful. So if we can get started, I would like to I think I'm going to have to segment this. First, start with your filmmaking career. So if you'd like to address how you first got into filmmaking and just the history of that.
Yeah, I've always worn two hats. One hat was I've always played music and was also a square dance caller, but also I have a background in child development, and my filmmaking originally started related to child development, where I was working with kids with disabilities and realizing that by using, at the time it was even film, it wasn't even video yet, we were shooting film and splicing it, working at a rehabilitation hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we were realizing that if we film the kids, we could give feedback to the kids about what they were doing, and we could use it as training tools for staff to help them figure out what they could do better. And as soon as I got into that, I realized that nothing tells a story as well as moving pictures. And so I started with that, but then I very soon after that, I was studying square dance calling. You mentioned it with Jerry Goodwin. I had a grant from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and realized that the best way to capture square dance music, old time square dance music and dances, was to record it. And so I started producing documentaries about the callers and the square dance musicians that I was studying with in southwestern Pennsylvania. And
Right. One of them was dance to the music and listen to the calls.
yeah, yeah, and that film is available on folkstreams.net. I have a few documentaries on folkstreams.net, and if you don't know about it, it's a great curated site of documentaries about all kinds of topics related to American life.
Key point. Folkstreams.net.
Yeah. So anyway, so those two things happened at the same time. Within a couple of years, and I realized, oh, I love making movies about music and dance, and I love making movies about the field of early childhood disabilities. And for the next 50 years, that's what I've been doing is producing movies in both those fields. That's kind of how I got started.
How fortuitous. That is wonderful. Do you have a particular approach to filmmaking?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I do, and it's not one I'd necessarily recommend, and it's not necessarily one I've heard other people talk about. I tend to just immerse myself in the topic that I'm interested in making a film about, and filming everything I can and collecting every artifact I can, and then putting it in front of me, on an edit screen, and try to make sense of it. And to through the collecting both of artifacts, of old recordings, old images, old video or film, and the process of filming myself, I tend to start taking shape what my viewpoint is on the subject. And then I kind of move things around and sculpt it. I don't start from a storyboard or an outline when I produce. I let the material kind of tell me where it wants to go, and so I think it takes me a little bit longer to make movies, and it's a little bit more divergent than convergent. It's more like I want to look everywhere and then get convergent and say, well, what's my viewpoint on all the stuff I've collected, rather than someone who writes a script or a storyboard and says, okay, I'm going to focus everything on this. So that's kind of what my approach is. The other part of my approach is I film and I edit. So when I'm collecting footage, part of my mind is always imagining myself editing, and that helps to inform the actual shoots, which is fun.
Right. So, yeah, I noticed some of that in the film about the Canote Twins. You took a lot of vintage footage of them and photos of them as they were younger and so forth. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it was, I've known those guys for more than 40 years, I think.
Mm.
And um, And so I have a lot of old documentation of them. I had old pictures of them from the late 1970s or early 1980s, and recordings. There's a one square dance scene in there where it's a tape that I made of them playing for a square dance in, I think, 1982. And I'm a pack rat, so I save
Me
every,
too.
all the material that I ever capture, record, and so I had that. And so I love ephemera, and I love ephemeral film. I love film that speaks of a time and that takes us back. And so I probably spent equal amounts of time in that film collecting artifacts as I did creating new material.
It's interesting that you titled it the Canote Twins, and that you did focus a lot on their background and how they came to play their instruments, and some of the challenges and joys of being close brothers.
Yeah, that was, I had to talk them into this movie. At first they were, even though they knew me and trusted me and had seen other films I'd made, and we'd worked together. We recorded an album together, and so we knew each other really well. But I had to talk them into it, and I think how I did was I wanted to make a movie not just about the music, which is stellar music. You won't find better brother music anywhere, any sibling music. They really are in the tradition of, the Stanleys and the Everly brothers and the Monroe Rose and everyone else. But in addition to that, these guys have a very specific quality that you only know when you see them in concert or when you hang out with them, which is they're two very happy people, and they have this infectious quality where anyone around them feels happy being around them. Like I said, whether you're in an audience at a concert or whether you're playing music with them or just meeting them and hanging out and goofing around. And I wanted to tell that story too, that these guys are just unique individuals.
Yeah, and unique in their pastimes as well.
Yeah, they are. Jerry is an instrument builder, and he builds pretty fanciful instruments. He builds ukuleles, banjos, and Greg is an artist, a painter, and
Yeah.
has some very very stylistic qualities to his work, and so they bring their art to the world as well as their music.
Yeah, and one of the things I will say is that Greg happens to be one of the most amazing fiddlers that I've ever heard. And Jerry, on the banjo, guitar, or uke, whatever he's playing, I mean, he's just perfect. And I came across them when I was trying to relearn Gray Cat on a Tennessee Farm. And of course, it's an Uncle Dave Macon tune. But I was Googling for it because I hadn't played it since college and I wanted to relearn it. And they blew me away. First of all, the instrument that Jerry was playing had to be one that he handmade because I didn't know what it was exactly. It was almost like a minstrel banjo um, or a baritone of some sort. And
Yeah, I think it's a baritone banjo. I think I
and
know
it was
that the clip you're talking about.
right.
Yeah.
And then Jerry, with Greg with his fiddling play, he's just the most ornamental and fluent fiddle player that I've ever heard. So, I mean, they're my favorites.
Well, they're not only great musicians, individually, but together they just intuit each other. They don't really rehearse.
Oh, really?
They just play and they
Hmm.
figure it out as they're playing. And there is a bit of intuition, that uh, but yeah, they have this otherworldly quality. In the movie, I interviewed a great musician from Berkeley, a guy named Paul Katapish, and Paul says it's like they have their own Bluetooth thing going on that they communicate,
And
telepathic.
it seems like nothing flusters them. I remember that Jerry had forgotten some of the words, and he just went, "Blah, blah, blah, blah," and Greg was like, "New lyrics." They're just so good together.
Well,
Um,
I'll tell you one of the things they talk about that's responsible for that. It were two things. One is they want to have fun, and I could see a performer forgetting words at a concert getting flustered, but these guys want to have fun. And so why not laugh at ourselves and just move on? The other thing is that they talk about that you could see in their performances. They're trying to crack each other up.
oh yeah.
They're actually, so even though they're playing for an audience, they're playing for each other, and they both do things that crack the other guy up. So it's a pleasure to watch that.
Wonderful. Yeah. So, how did you first come in contact with them? And can you talk a little bit about the recording you did together with them?
Well, it, it was I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and knew a legendary square dance caller. And I shouldn't say legendary like she's not with us anymore. She sure is with us. In fact, I talked to her yesterday, Sandy Bradley, who stellar musician, piano player, guitar player, singer, and a great square dance caller. And I met her in the late '70s from just being traveling around playing for square dances and calling square dances. And she called me up, I forget what year, maybe 1980, somewhere around there, and said, "Hey, I want to come to Pittsburgh to call a square dance, and I'm going to bring these two guys with me, and you're going to love them." So I booked her the gig at my square dance, and they came, and she was right. I did love them, and it was just, and ever since then we've been friends. We've what happened was about a year after I met them, maybe a year or two, they were doing a tour from Seattle, right down through Oregon and down into California. And Sandy had decided she didn't want to call that tour because they were doing concerts and dance at square dances. And so she invited me to come out and be their square dance caller. And so I traveled with them. And that was really the start of, hanging out and our friendship. And that sort of led to the recording because I write a lot of tunes. And while we were hanging out and traveling, we were playing a lot of my tunes, and every now and then they'd invite me to sit in on one of their concerts, and we'd play one of the instrumental tunes that I write. And that led to Sandy saying, "Hey, why don't we make a whole CD of your music? I'll produce it." And so that led to a recording called Timepieces.
Timepieces, is it available?
It is.
Okay, where can we find that these days?
Well, I don't, it may be through CD Baby, but I think I just heard that CD Baby just quit selling hard copies. I'm not sure. It was originally available at CD Baby, but anyone could get in touch with me through Piggy Snout Productions.
Piggy Snout. Okay.
PiggySnoutProductions.com. You go there and go to the contact form, and that goes right to me.
I know I can't wait to meet them. I'm going to Breaking Up Winter in Nashville, and they are playing there, and I can't wait to see them in person.
You're in for a treat.
And I hope that I'll be able to interview them someday, like I'm interviewing you. So, can you talk about your own music? And by the way, I wanted to ask, they didn't steal any songs from you, did they? Because they're famous for writing their own as well.
They both write tunes and songs. And, one of the things you'll see in the film is for about a dozen years, they did a weekly live radio show, Sandy Bradley's Potluck, where it was Sandy Bradley's show. They were her sidekicks, but, there was really the three of them. And then they had great guests. But they had to do 3 to 4 new songs every single weekend. And so they not only mined a lot of music from times gone by, but they wrote a lot of songs. So they both wrote a lot of songs with lyrics, and both Jerry and Greg write instrumental tunes as well.
Right, like Sadie at the Back Door, Obama's March to the White House.
Yep.
Wonderful tunes that I also play.
Yeah. Yeah, they write great tunes. So no, they haven't stolen one of mine. They played one of mine on a CD they made. I had written a tune that was sort of a take on the gal I left behind, called "The Girl I Left Way Behind," and they had recorded that on a CD that they put out.
I think of John Hartford adding his lyrics to that tune. Yeah, so let's talk about how you get started in music, and and then after that we'll talk about your calling and such. Which came first, the calling or the playing?
The playing. And I'm like a lot of people. I'm old as dirt, and I'm like a lot of people of my generation. Where I cut my teeth on rock and roll. And in junior high school I played drums in a band that was playing Rolling Stone songs, and then but I started playing guitar and really listening to a lot of folk music in high school, and and sitting with friends playing Bob Dylan songs, And then in college, I was really into the Allman Brothers and just sitting by a turntable trying to learn Duane Allman solos, And
Oh yeah.
but 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 I always played guitar and always enjoyed um, learning tunes on guitar, and so I got an old book. I don't know if you heard of it, Cole's 1,000 Fiddle Tunes.
Oh yeah.
And I just, that's how I was trying to learn how to read music, by just reading tunes in Cole's 1,000 Fiddle Tunes. And that's when I realized, oh, it's tunes that I like. It's kind of, American, Celtic, African influenced old time music. And so started playing that. And then I ended up playing guitar with a variety of square dance bands. This was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So,
Geez, I worked in Pittsburgh. I didn't know you were around or that there was an old time scene there.
oh yeah, there was a great old time scene there, and so I ended up playing, in various square dance bands. And one day, the square dance caller, and I was playing guitar at the time, and one day the square dance caller came late, and there were dancers there. And someone said, could anyone call a dance? And I never thought about it, but through osmosis, with playing guitar in the square dance band, you kind of have to be intentionally stupid, a little dumb, and just, you want to go boom chuck a million times. And it's fun, but it's a little bit more mindless, than other instruments when you're playing for 10 minutes at a time. And so I kind of by osmosis had absorbed a few square dance calls. And so I called a dance and I enjoyed it. I don't have any recollection whether anyone else enjoyed it, but I did. And so I was playing with a band at the time, Devilish Mary, and I said, and we played both Irish and old time music. And I said to my friend Ellie McCullough, hey, how about if you learn how to play guitar, and I'm going to go to West Virginia and learn how to call square dances. And so during that summer, I went and found a bunch of old guys and guys who were my peers, who had a couple of years on me in calling square dances, and started learning, and that was it. So I was playing music before calling square dances, but then square dancing.
Right. So I think Devilish Mary, do you have a presence on YouTube at all? Any videos there?
They still play together.
I've heard that, that before.
Yeah.
I don't know if it included you or not. But,
No, they most of them still live in Pittsburgh. Sue and Jan and Ellie McCullough, who left Pittsburgh and went to New Jersey, actually, and now is back in Pittsburgh. And Burr Beard,
shucks.
and Burr Beard lives not far away. So they, they still play.
Great. So was your next instrument the mando or a fiddle?
It was guitar, then mandolin. Yeah,
that was the same with me. The same progression. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I also played bouzouki, Greek bouzouki, to back up Irish music, and played Irish tunes on tenor banjo as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I came to fiddle late. I was well in my 30s, I think, before I played fiddle. But like many people, the fiddle bug hit me hard.
I know. I came to it late as well. So now, do you have any special memories or favorites of all the bands you've been in and all the things that you've played, the workshops that you've taught? I mean, there's so much to go through there, but anything that really stands out that was gratifying to you?
Oh boy, that's a tough question. There's
a little too broad.
A million things, I guess the thing I love is having an ensemble with really close friends and spending a lot of time together to figure out the mix of what everyone brings to it, and then figuring out what we want to play and how we want to play it, and then eventually either performing it or recording it. Just that whole community of a band. is always been magical. I'm not a great musician. I'm not a soloist. I'm a good band member. And so for me, well, here's how I look at it. I'm making a documentary right now about a musician who passed away a couple of years ago, a guy named Pete Sutherland.
Pete Sutherland, yeah.
And so I'm working with some people producing a documentary about him, and I'm reviewing a lot of old interviews that he did. And in one interview, he says, they asked him for his advice. He says, always try to play with people who are better than you. and he's right. And that's what I love, is just, playing with folks who challenge you to bring your best and do your best and to become your best, and so, like I said, to get a group of people who are going to get together and figure out that mix and how we could all create something together. That I think is my favorite part of playing music. The other thing that's my favorite part of playing music is I love learning new tunes. It's, some people have different hobbies. They paint, or they knit, or they crochet, or they sculpt. Learning a new tune just takes me to that place where the world disappears and time disappears, and I'm just in a flow with the piece of music I'm learning.
And there's so many tunes, so many. I don't know how we keep them straight in our heads. I'll forget tunes from time to time and then have to be reminded. Do you learn from the sheet music or by ear?
No, I don't read music, and I've actually published a book of music, but I had to play them for a friend to transcribe them. So no, I don't read music. I tried, and it just didn't work. But I learned very early on that if I put on a recording of a scratchy fiddle player from way back when and laboriously go through it and learn that tune, I'll remember it forever. But if I learn it back then, like the Coles 1000 fiddle tunes, when I was, it was, I forget them pretty quickly.
Right.
Plus, I love trying to learn the nuances and the subtleties of different players, and so I can't hear a piece of music that I'm reading.
Yeah, in my generation, which was the folk revival era, a lot of people learned from people like Tommy Jarrell down in that area. Did you have any, I want to say, mentors or role models that you particularly followed?
Not really with guitar. Not really with guitar. Guitar, I kind of bullied my way through it, and just kind of figured it out. With mandolin, I was playing Irish music at the time, and I was very influenced by two people. One, Mick Maloney, who was a stellar Irish musician who passed away not long ago. And he lived in Philadelphia, and he really helped me out, as well as a guy back then I played in a band with, a fellow named Barry Foy, was also very influential with Irish music. And I mentioned Ellie McCullough, who's a flute player and a tin whistle player and a bagpiper. He was really my entree to Irish music, and they were there. With fiddle, it's interesting because I played a million old time fiddles on mandolin, but I'm used to going up and down and up and down and down and up and down and up, and I had no idea how to approach bowing. But I was fortunate in that I called square dances and I traveled to do it. I was doing it full time, and I got to work with some of my favorite old time musicians in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would work at a festival, getting hired as a square dance caller, I would take workshops and sit down with lots of old time fiddlers where I would say, hey, show me what to do. And so there's too many to name, but I'll try to name a few. Alan Jabbour,
Really?
who I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with. Greg Canote was instrumental. Pete Sutherland, Mark Gunther from Chicago, and Brad Leftwich.
Oh, really?
Tom Sauber, and Bruce Molsky. I
Yeah, Bruce
live
Melsky.
in the DC area, and and we would spend time together, and we played a lot of dances together. So as a square dance caller, I was always holding a mic with one hand and holding a recorder with the other in back of me, recording band, and many times I would be calling and I'd get distracted by how interested I was in the music. And so, but I did that many times, calling with one hand and recording the fiddlers with the other. So I was very eclectic. There were a couple of older fiddlers that I got very attracted to. One is Melvin Wine from West Virginia, and I played
Oh,
a ton of Melvin's music, and also Kentucky fiddler Snake Chapman. I just love his music, and
nice.
uh,
Wow, you've known some great people.
yeah. The other two I do want to mention, Seattle fiddlers, both David Kahn, who I've learned a ton of music from, and have played in a couple of bands with him, and also Armin Barnett. Uh, Both of them have been really influential.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that bowing is something that is very difficult for a lot of people to pick up, but it's the key really to fiddling. I think it's the right hand is so important. So, of all the festivals that and you've traveled to quite a bit, you've been at all of these famous festivals like Ashokan, Augusta, etc. And how did you get into that circuit that you were able to, that you were recognized and able to play and teach workshops at all of these places?
I Originally I was hired as a square dance caller, and then and there weren't too many of us around the country who really were calling traditional square dances. There was a big handful. I'm talking about back in the 80s, and early 90s. There weren't that many people who were really studying it, who were really calling it and trying to be true to sources, just like fiddlers are, trying to honor the sources where they learn their tunes. And so folks were, hiring me a lot. I did a lot of research in southwestern Pennsylvania, in the three counties in Washington, Fayette, Greene, Beaver, Butler counties down there, where I was visiting rural dances and studying with older callers and older musicians. And so I was hired a lot at workshops to both teach the tunes and to teach the dances and the style and the kind of culture and aesthetics of those rural communities. And so that's I think why I was hired a lot. I also, back then was just getting hired for what we called one night stands, just going somewhere and calling at a contra dance or a square dance. But soon I was not only calling square dances but also at these festivals, but asked to do a workshop, sometimes on playing for square dancing or teaching mandolin workshops. When I moved to Colorado, I started playing a lot of what's called Southwestern music, or it's also called Spanish colonial music, or the music of northern New Mexico, the music of the Rio Grande. It has a lot of names, but it's the Hispanic music of the Southwest, and I play in a band, the Southwest Musicians, and we play for a lot of dancing, and so I also teach those dances.
Right, Lorenzo Trujillo.
Yeah,
Trujillo.
Lorenzo Trujillo and the Southwestern, yeah, musicians. And
Yeah, that seems like an interesting change up.
it is, and it's lovely music. It's and it's very interesting music because it's a lot of it's music of European origin that came to Mexico in the New World when Napoleon conquered Mexico.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the ballroom dances of Europe came over to the New World, and then and they already had violins and guitars that were introduced to play sacred music. And so, as the music filtered out of the cities and then up into, what now is the United States, um, there was a lot of not only Spanish influence, but Native American influence in a lot of the music. And so it's lovely music, and there's polkas and waltzes and schottisches, and but all with a very distinctive Hispanic flair.
Wow, you've just managed to evolve over time. And it's amazing how you've brought these different influences together and the different careers together, filmmaking and making music and calling. They all seem to have converged somehow.
Somehow,
It's lovely.
maybe I just get bored. I do. I like different things, and career wise, for 50 years, I worked in the field of early childhood disabilities, and so I had many of my friends were full-time musicians, and that's what they did. I didn't go that route. I always had a, a career and jobs working, in programs, universities, related to early childhood disabilities, as well as playing music. So it was, I think, each allowed the other.
So, do you have any future projects or goals in mind right now?
I'm working on three main projects, film projects right now. One is, I mentioned, I'm working with Mark Sustick and Fletcher Fisher, two fellows from New England, on a documentary about Pete Sutherland, who, I don't know if you know. Pete Sutherland was an extraordinary fiddler, singer, songwriter, artist, poet, teacher, a really amazing guy who, I had met maybe 40 years ago. And he passed away a couple of years ago. And so we're making a documentary about Pete and his legacy.
Looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, me too. It's exciting, getting to know Pete through. It's the first film I've made about someone who had passed away. All my other films, whoever was the focus of my film, they were still alive, and so it was a very dynamic and reciprocal process of making the movie. This is the first film of someone who's passed, so it's very different. But anyway, another project I'm working on with the Field Recorders Collective is in 19, I can't remember what year, early 1980s, I think. Nancy and Rusty Nighthammer filmed Tommy Jarrell
Oh,
in a darkened room with a light on his bowing wrist. And it was bowing lights, and so the lights turn off, and you could see the trails of Tommy's fiddle, of his bowing. And I think it blew people away to realize that bowing wasn't linear, but bowing was circular. And so what we're doing now is we're taking that footage and revitalizing it, playing with it to optimize both the audio quality and the video quality. And it's great. It's about 20 tunes of the genius of Tommy Jarrell, playing to
wow.
in a dark room where you see really what the bowing patterns are in a very vivid way. And that film will be on the Field Recorders Collective website, and hopefully just within a few months. We're getting close.
Nice. Field Recorders
Collect,
Collective Red Side
and if you don't
website.
know the Field Recorders Collective, you need to go find them, because it's an organization that puts out dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of old recordings of old fiddlers, old time fiddlers and banjo players, and it's really a remarkable collection of music that they make available.
That will be an invaluable contribution.
Yeah.
I imagine the process is different because you're going to have to go and find archival footage for the Pete Sutherland project, unless you have, enough film that you've made of him.
No, no. Right now with the project Pete, that's what we're doing right now, is collecting things. We're collecting interviews that he's done. We're collecting concert performances, both solo and things he's done with the various bands he's played with. So that's what we're doing right now. Is it's the part of documentary production is called archival production. It's the search. It's always the belief that something of key value is out there. How do we find it? And that's the stage we're at right now, is looking for that needle in the haystack among 100 haystacks.
So was Alan Jabbour an influence on you?
He was, Alan Jabbour was the he was on staff at several week-long workshops that I was on staff with. So he was teaching fiddle and I was teaching square dance calling, but I would take his fiddle workshops and then get together with him. And also at the time I was living in Baltimore, Maryland, and he was, in DC, and so we got together and to play square dances together. And so he was very influential. He introduced me to the Henry Reed repertoire of tunes, and Alan, what a brilliant person and musician and fiddler. But he thought about it much different than I did, because he thought in terms of writing things out. So he would write out a tune and he'd write out bowing directions and write out where the slurs were, which I didn't. And so, but I would just nod my head like, oh yeah, I get that. And I wouldn't. I just had my tape recorder on, and then I would just try to sound like he sounded, because I couldn't, play from his notations.
Right. What an incredible body of work. Finally, I'd like to ask if you have any words of advice for aspiring musicians, filmmakers, callers, documentarians.
I think everybody has their own preferred ways of learning. I mean, I think we all learn using every tool there is. We learn by watching, we learn by asking, we learn by doing and making mistakes, and then hopefully learning from those mistakes. We learn from having a success and hopefully figuring out what did I do that was successful. And my advice is that we each, though, I think, tend to prefer some ways of learning than others. And my advice is twofold for learning new stuff. One is just get started. Don't wait. Just get started. Just dive in and just start doing something. And the other lesson is, don't get paralyzed by the way you tend to prefer to learn, because that may not be the best way to learn. It's one way of learning. And so if someone says, oh, I learn best by, listening, well, that's great, but maybe you need to learn as well by just doing it and deconstructing it as you do it. And so maybe those things are a little bit paradoxical, but not for me. It was always, for me, just I learned through doing, and then just trying to be very mindful of what's working, what isn't working, what do I have to learn. When I produced the Canote Twins, I had to learn probably a dozen new filmmaking skills and organizational skills that I had no idea how to do. And I just said, well, let's figure out how to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, that's something that is challenging, to try to have to learn new technologies at when we've been doing it one way for a long time. So I thank you very much for the time that you spent with us. It's been a fantastic blast for me to interview you. So just to reiterate, where can we find your work?
If you go to piggysnoutproductions.com, there are links to about, I don't know, 10 or so feature length documentaries I produced. And I also produce recordings of a lot of concerts of old time musicians. And there's links to those too. And all of them are available for free streaming. So the films aren't on the website, but the links to all those films are on the website. The other site is folkstreams.net. I have 3 films on there. And then the third site is the canotetwins.com.
Right.
CANOTE twins.com. Not only is there the feature film there, but also there's 16 extra short films of them
Oh,
playing tunes and telling stories.
bonus.
Yeah, some really great tunes from long ago and from just a year or two ago.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate that you've shared all of this experience with us tonight.
It's my honor and my privilege, my pleasure. So thank you.